Hey kids, we're here with Teo Skinsnes. He's the president of Stomvi-USA. He's also a designer of mouthpieces and a student of acoustic science as it pertains to our trumpet world. What are we talking about when we say gap? What is that? And then adjusting the gap and the systems that are available.
So here's 3 trumpet lead pipes, and receivers. Let's just talk about the top one for now. When you put a mouthpiece in it, that's what it looks like from the outside. Okay? On the inside, there ends up being a space where the mouthpiece ends and the lead pipe begins. That little space there. Okay? The scientific term for that is the annulus, but I don't like saying annulus more than twice in any interview, so we're going to call it what we as trumpet players call it, the gap. As you can see, on this lead pipe receiver setup, the mouthpiece is sticking out this far. On the next one down, you see that it's sticking out farther. And on the last one, it's sticking way out. Okay? But the crazy thing about this is the gap is virtually the same on all of these. The point being that how it looks on the outside does not indicate how large the gap is on the inside. So that's something that kind of trips guys up all the time. It's very common for someone to call and say, oh, my gap is too big because the mouthpiece is sticking out too far. And the point is, you don't know how big it is. It's not important to know how big the gap is, big or small. But the gap is, in my humble opinion, the most important dimension that you can adjust as a player to get your setup optimized for the way that you play. So what is the gap, or what does it do? It's actually a tuning device. It's kind of the last part of this intonation thing that Cardwell figured out. Well, let's think about a normal trumpet with the tuning slide. If you are playing a note playing the trumpet, and you pull the tuning slide out, basically the whole pitch of the instrument drops down by about the same amount. And if you pull that tuning slide in, basically the whole pitch of the instrument raises by about the same amount. It monotonically raises or lowers the pitch of the instrument. Okay, great. Well, it seems intuitive. I mean, it certainly does to me as a trumpet player. Well, wouldn't the same thing happen up here with the trumpet and the mouthpiece? If I make this long, pull this out further, right? Shouldn't it make everything get flatter? Well, that makes sense. And if I put it in further, shouldn't it make everything get sharper? Well, it seems like it should. Unfortunately, Mother Nature's got a sense of humor, and that's not what it does. And if you go to the Stomvi-USA website, there's a whole section in the Learn part about the gap, where I actually show graphs and stuff that we're not going to do in this interview, I don't believe, where you can understand what's happening. But for example, when you change the gap, you could make it bigger, you could make it smaller, it could theoretically leave all the notes exactly in the same relative intonation, but just move one of them sharp or flat. It could move 2 or 3 flat, 1 sharp, leave some the same. It could change them in some kind of weird pattern like this. It could go like this. It could go like that. There's all kinds of weird combinations that can happen. And it's nonlinear. It may make 3 notes flat, but not by the same amount. Some might be more flat than others. And so what you're doing by adjusting the gap, you're choosing the gap that gives you the most amount of notes in tune with themselves as you can get with your trumpet, your mouthpiece, and the way you play.
So you're trying to bring these frequencies as close to a center point, which is what we would see on a tuner as being in tune. So you might be slightly out on the high G and slightly out on the E below it, but the C is good and the G below it's good and the C below that. So that's kind of a typical thing that's like, you know, our E's a little flat, our G's a little bit sharp. You're not necessarily going to get everything to line up exactly in a linear way, but what you're doing is you're bringing like a majority of the notes closer to that center point or being more in tune.
Right, you're trying to get as close as you can. If you think back to beginning band, they teach you how to tune up typically for us trumpet players, we tune on the middle C. And what you do is they play a note on piano or whatever, and you play that middle C and you move the tuning slide until you're at the place where it's in tune. As you become a more accomplished player, that's usually not how you tune. You find a place where that tuning slide gives you the best overall pitch throughout the whole register. And it might not be that the tuning C is exactly correct from that standpoint. Well, the gap, you're trying to do the same thing, it's just more complicated. And so you're trying to get, like you said, the best set of intonation, grouping of notes in tune as you can get. And it's dependent upon, a number of things. How well is the instrument designed? How well is the mouthpiece designed? You could have Gabriel's trumpet with Gabriel's mouthpiece, and you got the wrong gap, and it's not going to be in tune. By the same token, you could have an inexpensive trumpet that isn't very well designed and some mouthpiece, and you're going to get the best intonation, which translates to the best performance of that setup by getting the gap right. It might be 70% of the notes, it might be 80%, it might be 90%, anywhere in there. Whatever trumpet, whatever mouthpiece you have, you're going to maximize the sound output, the ease of play, the upper register, your endurance, and this translates into having fun by getting the gap right. And again, it could be 70%, it could be 80%, it could be 90%, I have no idea. But whatever it is, you're going to maximize it there. You're not going to maximize it with mechanical damping or acoustic damping. You're going to maximize it by getting the gap right.
Everybody wants to have their gap measurement. They want to be told, what's my gap? And the problem is it's a moving target. I mean, it's not the same on different trumpets. It's not the same on different mouthpieces. And so you're working with guys, and you've basically just simplified this out of the calculation of the formula into better or worse. Can you explain that a little bit?
It's not that knowing what different gap measurements are is not interesting to me. Sure, it's interesting. In fact, on our website, there's a chart that shows the average gap per instrument, different brands of instruments. We don't have every brand out there, but a lot of them with different size couplers. So it shows you, for example, with a number 4 coupler, the average gap on a Schilke is this, the average gap on a Stomvi is this, the average gap on a whatever is so many, whatever the measurements are that we have. However, there's no way to calculate the proper gap for yourself yet. Coming soon.
Watch out now.
And the reason is because it's not, getting the gap correct is not a physical measurement. It's not related to the airflow. It's related to acoustic measurements. Okay? Old school thinking was that the gap adjusts the resistance or the back pressure that we feel. It's really not the case. There's a guy by the name of Dennis Fleischer, and he did, this is a PhD study, I believe, all about the gap. It's a lot of pages. It's not the most fascinating read, but it's a really good study, and he did a lot of things, and this was back in, let's see the date, 1980. So 1980. And he talked to the right people, Bob Reeves, who's been involved in the gap. And it's a good study. It's not as definitive as we know now, but it was a great place to start. And again, old school thinking was it was about adjusting the back pressure. What I've learned is that when you get the intonation correct, the highest percentage of notes in tune with themselves you can get, then the back pressure feels comfortable. So the back pressure becomes a byproduct of getting the acoustics right. Okay? If you want to prove to yourself that it's not related to airflow, there's a pretty simple way to do it. Can I have the trumpet back? You can put a coupler on here. In this case, it's a 3.5. And you can just do this. Try to blow about the same you think you blow when you're playing the trumpet. Okay? And then have your friend, your wife, your girlfriend, whatever, change the coupler. or leave it the same. So you don't know what it is. And do the same thing and see if you feel you really perceive a difference. I'd be surprised if you do. If you don't have a mouthpiece that's converted for couplers, put it in, do the same thing, and then put a little piece of paper on the outside of the shank so that it makes it stick out further, and do the same thing. It'd be pretty difficult to feel a difference. Yet when you're playing the instrument and you adjust the gap, most guys, extremely high percentage, way up in the 99 percentile, will certainly perceive a difference in the back pressure, the feel, the sound. And I really recommend you guys go and look at the area of the gap on our website. There's no obligation to buy. It's free information, but there are videos and stuff. And I think if you read the page and watched the videos, it might take you 8 or 10 minutes. There's 20-some years worth of effort gone into that, and still trying to go on more and more. These things, mouthpieces, they got resonance frequencies too. And think about it, if this is the cup of the mouthpiece and here are your lips, if you push your lips in further, guess what? The resonance frequency can go higher. If you pull them out further, the resonance frequency can go lower. And therefore, they're changing the acoustics of your system. They're affecting an important part of it. It's the way it is. This is also another reason why you cannot calculate the gap. You just can't do it. I know there are formulas out there and people talk about measuring this and measuring that, and you put this together and run it through your calculator and it tells you what your gap should be. Well, that's based only upon the mouthpiece and the trumpet. It's not taking the player into account. The player is important. Same mouthpiece, same trumpet, different player, meaning different lip penetration. It's not surprising that the gap demands are probably going to be different. You know, that's why you can't do it. I wish you could. You can't. In order to do it, you have to do some acoustic measurements, which are very impractical, and it's much easier to use a system like our flex coupler system because it's affordable, it's portable, it's easy to do. Anyway, so these couplers, which plug onto a mouthpiece that have been converted to accept them, they all have the taper we need to put them in a trumpet, but they vary in diameter. So if it's a larger diameter, it's going to stick out further. If it's a smaller diameter, it's going to go in further. It's pretty simple. So that gap's about the same with a number 2 as it is there. Number 2 being the largest gap, and number 7 being the smallest gap that we offer. And with a 7, the thing hits the lead pipe. Okay? So you've got quite a range going from the largest gap to virtually no gap. If you play an F major scale, for example, 1 octave, and you get to the F on top of the staff, just the top line, and you hold that for a couple beats with, let's say, a number 4 coupler, you're just listening to 2 things. When you get to that top F, pitch-wise, are you having to reach to get it in tune? Are you having to come down to get it in tune? Or is it right where you want it? That's number 1. You're looking for the gap that gives it as close to right where you want it as you can get. That gives the intonation of the octaves as close as you can get it. Okay? The other thing you're listening to is the resonance on any given note. The more resonant your trumpet and mouthpiece sound with a gap, the more in tune. Why? Because we're getting more of the notes in tune, 80, 90, 95%, whatever. And so they engage better, and you get a fuller, more resonant sound. So when I work with somebody, as anyone can tell you, I say it's like going to the eye doctor. I give them number 1, I have them play an F major scale. They play it. I give them the next coupler. I usually go in half sizes, so maybe 4, 4.5. Is it better or is it worse? If it's better, we keep going. If it's worse, we go in another direction. And it works really, really well at that point. The truth is, it could be any gap. It could be anything from a 2 to a 7's pretty rare to a 6.5.
So what you're doing is you're trying each one to see which one's the best.
Exactly.